The Galactic Academy's Xenobiology lecture hall fell into stunned silence as the massive Krillian assassin materialized through the dimensional tear, its obsidian exoskeleton gleaming under the artificial lights. 8 feet of pure predatory evolution stood before the terrified students, mandibles clicking with murderous intent. Most of the class, Veltari, Zephyrians, and gentle luminals, pressed themselves against the walls, their survival instincts screaming at them to flee. But Zia Chen just laughed. The sound cut through the tension like a plasma blade through silk. Not a nervous giggle or hysterical shriek, but genuine, delighted laughter that made the Krillian's compound eyes swivel toward her in confusion. "Oh, come on," Zia said, still chuckling as she leaned back in her chair. "Really? A Krillian? In Introduction to Xenobiology?" She shook her head, grinning. "Professor Veltar, this is either the most elaborate practical exam ever, or someone has a seriously twisted sense of humor." The assassin's head tilted, processing this unexpected response. In its 3 centuries of existence, prey had never laughed at its presence. Fear, yes. Paralysis, certainly. Begging, occasionally. But laughter? This was unprecedented. Elsa Nordstrom, Zia's roommate and study partner, watched from 2 seats over as her human friend continued to chuckle. The pale Veltari had seen enough of human behavior over their months together to know that Zia's reaction, while baffling to the rest of the galaxy, was quintessentially human. Where other species saw death incarnate, Zia saw a puzzle to solve. "You know," Zia continued conversationally, apparently oblivious to the assassin's razor-sharp claws extending from its forelimbs, "we studied your species last semester. Fascinating evolutionary adaptations, really. That exoskeleton can deflect most energy weapons, those mandibles can crush durasteel, and your reflexes are about 15 times faster than the galactic average." The Krillian took a step forward, confused by the lack of fear scent emanating from this small bipedal creature. Its mission parameters had been clear. Eliminate the human exchange student who had been asking too many questions about the hegemony's restricted research. Terror tactics usually softened targets before the kill, but this human seemed genuinely entertained. "But here's what's really interesting," Zia said, standing up slowly and pulling out her data pad. The movement caused several other students to whimper, certain she was about to be eviscerated. "Your species evolved on a high-gravity world with extreme temperature fluctuations, right? Krillos Prime, 2.3 times standard gravity, temperatures ranging from 200 to 150 Celsius. The assassin paused, mandibles twitching. How did this creature know such specific details about his homeworld? "See, that's the thing about humans," Zia continued, scrolling through her notes. "We're from a death world, too. Earth might not have your gravity extremes, but we've got our own special brand of nightmares. Hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, ice ages, plague, predators that hunt in packs." She looked up at the Krillian with bright, curious eyes. "We learned early that the best way to survive in a universe trying to kill you is to understand it first." Elsa watched in fascination as her human friend began to pace, apparently using the deadly assassin as a teaching aid. This was so typically Zia. Turn every situation into a learning opportunity, even apparent death. "Now your species relies heavily on intimidation because you're actually quite fragile in certain ways," Zia explained, seemingly to the class but clearly addressing the increasingly bewildered Krillian. "Those compound eyes are excellent for detecting movement but terrible in low light. Your exoskeleton is great against energy weapons, but vulnerable to kinetic impacts at the joints. And most importantly," she paused dramatically, "you're ambush predators. You rely on that initial shock and terror to paralyze your prey." The assassin's claws retracted slightly. This was not going according to any scenario in his tactical database. "But humans?" Zia grinned, and there was something predatory in her expression that made even Elsa's skin crawl. "We're persistence hunters. We don't rely on being the biggest or strongest or scariest. We just keep going. We adapt. We learn. We turn our environment's attempts to kill us into advantages." She pulled up a holographic display from her datapad, showing Earth's evolutionary timeline. "Ice Age? We invented fire and clothing. Plague? We developed medicine. Predators? We domesticated them or hunted them to extinction. Natural disasters? We built cities that could withstand them, then invented early warning systems." The Krillian found itself backing up as this small human advanced, not threateningly but with the casual confidence of an apex predator discussing prey. So when a Krillian assassin walks into my classroom, Zia said, her voice dropping to a conversational whisper that somehow carried more menace than any roar, my first thought isn't, oh no, I'm going to die. My first thought is fascinating. I wonder what made someone think sending a hunter-killer after a xenobiology student was a good idea. The dimensional tear behind the assassin began to flicker, indicating his extraction portal was destabilizing. He had to complete the mission or abort within the next few minutes. Let me guess, Zia continued, now close enough that the Krillian could smell the strange, metallic scent that all humans seem to carry. The scent of a species that had literally fought their way up from primordial ooze through countless extinction events. Someone's worried about my research into the hegemony's biological weapons program, the one that's been suspiciously targeting worlds with strategic resource deposits. The assassin's mandibles clicked, and what Elsa had learned was the Krillian equivalent of surprise. How could she possibly know about that classified operation? See, that's the thing about sending an alien assassin after a human xenobiology student, Zia said, pulling out what looked like a standard emergency beacon. We don't just study other species. We study other species with an eye toward understanding exactly how dangerous they are, how they think, and most importantly, she pressed a button on the beacon, how to call for help when they show up in our classroom. The beacon signal pierced through hyperspace, carrying not just a distress call but a complete tactical analysis of Krillian physiology, behavior patterns, and recommended countermeasures, all compiled by a human brain that treated potentially lethal situations as research opportunities. The assassin looked at the beacon, then at Zia's calmly expectant face, then at the dimensional portal that was now definitely closing whether he used it or not. In his mandible-guarded mind, he made a calculation that his species had never needed to make before. Was eliminating this target worth the risk of being stranded in a system where the prey species apparently treated apex predators as interesting academic challenges? You know what the really funny part is? Zia asked as the Krillian began backing toward his rapidly shrinking escape route. I wasn't even that close to exposing the whole operation. I was just following interesting data patterns. But now, she smiled, and several non-human students later described the expression as the most terrifying thing they'd seen in their academic careers. Now I'm really curious. The assassin dove through the dimensional tear just before it snapped shut, leaving behind only the lingering scent of ozone and a classroom full of students staring at the human who had just laughed at death and convinced it to leave. Professor Veltar's tentacles quivered as he tried to process what had just occurred. In his 70 years of teaching, he had never seen a student treat an assassination attempt as an impromptu lecture opportunity. Well, Zia said, settling back into her chair and pulling out her actual notes, I guess we should get back to studying symbiotic relationships in low-gravity environments. But first, she looked around at her traumatized classmates. Anyone else suddenly very interested in helping me research hegemony bioweapons programs? Because I have a feeling this is going to be a much more interesting semester than I originally planned. Elsa raised her hand, her blue skin still pale from shock, but her eyes bright with curiosity. After months of living with a human, she was finally beginning to understand why the rest of the galaxy found them so unsettling. They didn't just survive in a universe trying to kill them. They thrived on it.